Hello, and welcome to the dungeon. I'm your host, Rob. In today's video, we're continuing our series on multiclassing tier guides, and we've worked our way down to Monk. Now, you've probably heard me complain about monks before, but today we're going to try to do something different. Today we're going to try to be positive, and we're going to build monks up. I feel like, back when, I've mentioned this before, but my most heavily downvoted video I ever made was on the Way of the Four Elements Monk. And I had some criticisms of just the way the class was designed and kind of like the over-reliance on everything costing you key points, all your spell type abilities, all your monk abilities, just everything, right? And I think at the time, monks were still like kind of viewed rather favorably. And then ironically, things like Valor Bards were not, But I think as time's gone on, more and more people have kind of come around on the idea that maybe monks aren't so well designed. So I feel like I've been kind of vindicated. But I also feel like the pendulum has swung way too far, where now people just absolutely trash monks and hate on monks all the time. And I don't think that's fair either. I do think that monks do have some good stuff to offer. I've been particularly hard on them in this particular series because monks tend to not multi-class very well. And up till now, we've been looking at monks as like a dip where something else is our main class. We're just grabbing a bit of monk. And to be honest, monks don't work very well in that category. You can't wear armor while using your monk abilities. Your key points are dependent on your monk levels. Your extra attack isn't stacking with other martials. And so there's just a lot of areas where monks just aren't particularly compatible. And especially if you're only looking to take a little bit of monk, it's just usually not a good fit. There have been some exceptions, which we've talked about, but overall it's not great. However, today we're looking at a monk-focused group of builds, right? And I think that this is where monk looks a lot better. When you have a lot of monk levels, you've got a lot of key points, and maybe you're just looking to add a little bit of something else. Maybe you're grabbing some spell casting to cover for something specific, like maybe you wanted a shield spell or Armor of Agathis or something like that. Maybe you wanted to add something like a Hunter's Mark or a Hex to your repertoire. And especially when you're using things like a Flurry of Blows, and you can be attacking like 4 times per round, that D6 of damage starts adding up a lot faster. And so there are some nice combinations that we can use with Monk and some nice abilities we could get. Granted, you could grab Hunter's Mark or Hex just by taking the Magic Initiate feat, but that's not the focus of this video. The point is, there is some good things on Monk, and I want to try to be honest here that I don't think monks are as bad as a lot of people now make them out to be. I feel like at the beginning people overrated monks, but like I said, the pendulum's gone way too far, and now people act like monks are just absolute trash. And I don't think that's fair either. I do think that monks have some certain limitations. I don't think they're the best designed class by any means, but monks are very mobile, they have a lot of attacks, and if you start figuring out ways to like really exploit those abilities, then monks can be really, really solid still. So I also want to mention, I don't normally talk about races, partly because at this point, there's so many playable races in this game that, just going through like, oh, well, everything that gives you dex is good, and we need wisdom too, so just take something that gives you dex and wisdom or whatever, right? I normally don't bother. Also, we've got, things like custom, from Tasha's. You got variant human. There's a lot of ones that may not be like the strongest stat-wise, but they give you like feats and stuff to start with. But there is an exception, I think, that we need to make for monks. If your campaign allows it, there are certain races that are just really, really good as a monk. Things like Tabaxi and Lizardman and Aarakocra, which all give you the ability to use like talons and claws and stuff, which actually do quite a bit of damage in some cases for your offhand attacks. That can often be more preferable at low levels than just using your unarmored strikes. And of course, there's the Turtle, which gives you natural armor class. And who doesn't want to be a ninja turtle anyway? So, we got to at least mention them. And a lot of the monks' problems focus on their lack of armor, to be honest. So taking something like a turtle can actually help with that a lot. So if your campaign allows it, be on the lookout for some of these types of races that could boost your defenses or boost things like your attack damage, right? However, if your campaign doesn't allow those kind of things, that's okay too, but, just realize that you're going to be playing more of a standard monk, and that's okay too, right? So, as I always mention in every video, mostly when I'm multiclassing, I'm looking for three main things. Number one is I want to kind of like double down on whatever my core proficiency is, right? So if I'm really good at the class for one thing, and I find another class that does something similar but differently, perhaps I can combine their mechanics and be really good at it. And a great example of that is Monk. We already mentioned things like Hex or Hunter's Mark or Hexblade's Curse, for example. Being able to stack those kind of bonuses on top of your multiple attacks that monks get is really, really nice. So that's number one. Number two is usually to cover for weaknesses in the class, right? So I always give the example of the wizard who can't wear armor, so they take a level or two in fighter to begin with. This gives you armor proficiencies, it gives you a shield, it gives you constitution, saving throw proficiency for your concentration checks. So there could be a lot to gain there, right? Unfortunately, this is a case where monks don't necessarily look to pick up a lot because you can't wear armor while using your monk abilities anyway. And yeah, there can be some niche builds where you just don't care about your monk abilities. Maybe you just wanted something specific. But that's not what I'm talking about in this video. We're talking about like monk-themed and monk-centric abilities, right? Even if you go into a multi-class that eventually has more levels of whatever the other class is than monk, all these videos are going to be built from the idea of kind of like that monk core. And then maybe we add spells or whatever else on top of that, right? So we're not talking about like, a wild shaping druid that takes one level of monk just for unarmored defense so they can have better armor class and all their shapeshifts. That's a druid build with one level of monk. We're looking at monk videos today, okay? Anyways, reason number three to multiclass is to gain utility. Now, utility generally is the weakest reason to multiclass, as I always mention, but that still doesn't make it a bad reason. And honestly, it's one of the reasons I like the best. Mechanically, it's maybe not as strong, but personally, I like playing characters that have like a large toolbox and can kind of do a lot of different things. So for me, utility multiclasses are something I often look at, right? This could be adding things like ritual spell casting, those kind of things, right? So maybe I don't take a big investment in this other casting class, but the fact that I can pick up a bunch of ritual spells, cast them out of combat, that gives my monk suddenly a lot more abilities than they would have otherwise had, right? So those are my three main reasons. And as always, we'll be rating it on the tier system, which is quite popular here on the internet. We're going to have our A, B, C, D, and E. And of course, reigning supreme above them all is the S tier. Now, I tend to be rather picky on what I put in the S tier. I've mentioned this before. So, if you see a build and I rate it as an A and you think, well, I think that should have been an S. That's okay. It might be an S, right? Like everybody rates things a little differently, right? But I've made the comparison before that I'm like the Football Hall of Fame, not the Hockey Hall of Fame. The Hockey Hall of Fame, just everybody gets in eventually. Football Hall of Fame, they got standards, Only the best of the best. Although even they're starting to slip, so they're not the greatest example these days. But hopefully you get the point. Anyways, enough preamble. Let's get on with the show. So monks themselves have quite a bit of flexibility. You've got your key points that can give you extra movement. You get things like Stunning Strike. You get extra attack. You can use unarmed attacks. You can use Flurry of Blows to increase the number of unarmed attacks. And then, of course, you also get higher level abilities. You're kind of dodgy and evasive, which is good because your armor class probably sucks and you've only got a D8 for hit points. So if you do get hit, like say you get crit or something, you're going to be in trouble. Just bear that in mind. The one problem we often have, though, is when we're multi-classing with Monk, our bonus action is usually pretty busy. We're either making offhand attacks or flurry of blows attacks, like I said, or we're using key for other things like extra movement and whatnot, and it can be kind of a problem. So in general, while I've already talked about things like Hex and Hunter's Mark being great additions, there is a problem that if you want to use those things, bear in mind that if you're constantly having to move your Hex spell from target to target to target, you're not able to use those offhand attacks, right? So while those abilities are still really good, you may want to use them a lot in, say, boss fights or creatures where you know they have a ton of hit points. Because if you're just using it on like trash fights all the time, and you know, every round you're having to move that hex spell, then it's actually going to start like interfering a lot with what you could be doing with your monk, right? And in some cases it could be costing you damage. So, you know, bear that in mind. So, anyways, as always, we'll start alphabetically with the Artificer. Now, unfortunately, Artificer does not offer us a lot. Yes, we can get some infusions and get some low-level magical items, and that's not necessarily a bad thing, but, you know, as a monk, we're not able to like wear armor, so infusing armor is not going to do us any good. Infusing weapons is okay, but all of our like unarmed attacks aren't going to benefit from that anyway, so we're actually seeing less value from that than a lot of other classes would. In the end, we can't wear the armor that it gives us. It's only a half caster, so if we want to pick up spell casting, there's probably better options out there. It uses intelligence as well, and you know, we're already using dexterity. We also need some wisdom, and if we're going to play like kind of a skirmishing front line guy, even if we're planning to like kind of jump in and move out a lot, we probably need at least some constitution, and having to fit intelligence in here as well gets to be a lot. Now, if you roll for stats, it's not as bad, but overall, I just don't see a lot of reason to take Artificer, and I was tempted to put it in the D, but I think I'm just going to put it in the E because it's kind of borderline, so I'm just going to, instead of giving the benefit of the doubt, I'm going the other way and just saying like, you know what, probably best avoided. So, unfortunately, Artificer just doesn't really give us a lot. Barbarian. So there are some problems here. The unarmored defense from Barbarian does not stack with our unarmored defense from the monk, so that's kind of useless for us. Barbarian uses strength for most of his attacks. We're probably going to be using dex, so again, not great. But there are a few things that I kind of like. Rage for half damage is pretty decent. We're not concentrating on anything anyways. We're not casting spells as a monk. So, you know, you could bonus action rage, and then after that you're just attacking. You're probably not getting rage damage bonuses, but you're at least taking half damage. And reckless attack can be good, although bear in mind that giving everybody advantage to hit somebody that squishy can be an issue. Again, if you're allowed to play Turtle, I think this helps quite a bit with Barbarian. But even still, if you have, say, a 17 armor class, but everybody's attacking you with advantage, you're probably still going to get hit. In the end, I kind of felt like Barbarian had potential, but I kind of rated it as a C. I feel like there's a bunch of good, but a bunch of bad as well, so that kind of gives it a mid-tier ranking, in my opinion. Next, we have the Bard. So Bards are going to give us spells. We can get expertise. We can get some skills, of course, skill proficiencies, jack of all trades. Overall, it's not bad. The problem with Bard is that now we're needing charisma. Like I said, we already need dex and wisdom. And I feel like if I want to add spells, I'm probably better off adding spells from a class that uses wisdom. I already need wisdom. I might as well be using a wisdom caster instead. So while Bard isn't necessarily a bad choice, I feel like we can get spells from other classes. We can get expertise and skills from classes like Rogue, which are using Dex. The only thing we really might like is Jack of all trades. But in the end, I don't know that there's really enough to draw me here. I'm kind of on the fence between like a really high D and a low C. I think we'll stay with a C because I don't think it's awful by any means. I think that like something like, say, a Kensai and maybe College of Swords Bard, and maybe you're able to use some like flourishes and stuff like that. That can be okay. And one thing with Swords Bard is we could go to level 5 without getting extra attack because they don't get it till 6, which does at least give us our inspiration on a short rest. So we're not like doubling up on features and wasting extra levels. So I think that like a Kensai, 5+ and College of Swords Bard that cuts off right at level 5 might not be too bad. It does give us 3rd level spells as well. It's too bad we don't have counter spell on our list, of course, but can't win them all. But I feel like that one's not awful. So in the end, we're going with a C, like I said, instead of a D. But I feel like there's everything that we get from Bard, we could get somewhere else instead, and it's probably better, I guess is what I'm trying to say. Next we have Cleric. So Cleric gives us spells, which of course are using Wisdom, so already off to a good start. Domain features. I feel like spells like a Healing Word, a Lay Hands, these things are kind of nice where we can like use them to help out. And mostly we're going to be attacking, but then if an ally goes down, we suddenly have this other option. Shield of Faith is a very nice spell that we might want to cast on ourselves. 2 armor class. It does require concentration, but that's okay. We probably don't have a lot to concentrate on as a monk, right? And that does help to shore up some of those defenses. And depending on what subclass we took for like the domain feature, that could be alright as well. Overall, I feel like Cleric gets a B, but there is one Cleric I specifically want to mention, and we're going to put them in the A, and that is the War Cleric. Specifically because they get Divine Favor on their spell list. And we've already talked about things like Hex and Hunter's Mark. Divine Favor makes it so that we just do that extra D4 damage, radiant damage on our attacks, and while it's not quite as good as Hunter's Mark or Hex, it's not too bad either. And, you know, having that, having something like Shield of Faith, which is on your domain list, by the way, so you don't have to even have it prepared, having the options of having some extra heals, perhaps being able to make a bonus action attack with our weapon might be better than offhand with just our fists, right? You know, now at least we have the option of either one. I think that that one's not too bad. I don't know that it's enough to put it up in S tier for me, but I do think like it's a pretty decent build. So we're going to give Cleric a B and then A specifically for the War Cleric, mostly because of the Divine Favor option. Next we have Druid. So Druid's also going to give us spells. We could grab a spell like Shillelagh as well, which is potentially nice, right? Wild Shape, although as I mentioned before, if we're not going Moon Druid, and even if we are, if we're going mostly Monk, our Wild Shape isn't going to be highly useful in combat. But we could be using it for scouting and stuff like that. Unless you want to take more Druid levels, like if you took like 8 levels of Druid, for example, Moon Druid, you could turn into something like, you know, like a flying snake or something with a flying speed, right? And, you know, that could give you different strategic options. But overall, especially if I wanted, you know, a decent amount of monk levels, I feel like Druid's decent. Not being able to wear armor doesn't really hurt us because, you know, Druids have pretty poor armor choices to begin with, so the monk and Druid don't really conflict there. The only problem is I feel like most of what Druid gives us, Cleric might do a little better. So I'm putting Druid also in the B tier, but I'm probably putting like Cleric at 1 and Druid at 2 kind of thing, like just right behind it. I do think that the wild shaping and being able to like scout and explore does make up for a lot though. So it's pretty close. And if somebody says, hey, I think Druid might actually be better, I don't blame you in the least. It was kind of a toss-up in my opinion. Anyways, next we have the Fighter. So Fighter, of course, is going to give us a fighting style. It's going to give us action surge. It's going to give us a bonus action, self-only heal. Probably a subclass, I would imagine. And overall, dipping Fighter for like 3-4 levels is not too bad at all. Even 2 levels just for action surge and the fighting style can be good. But I don't mind it too much. Obviously, we can't benefit from the armor and shield choices, which is unfortunate. Action surge isn't quite as useful on the monk because so many of our attacks are coming from the bonus action rather than just the attack action. But we still have extra attack. We're still benefiting from it. It's not bad by any means. You know, you could attack twice, action surge, attack twice, flurry of blows, attack twice as a bonus action. That's 6 attacks around by the time you're like level 7 potentially, right? That's not too bad. I feel like pretty much all the fighter subclasses have something good to offer for the most part. The one that really stands out, though, in my opinion, would probably be the Eldritch Knight, though. Grabbing the shield spell would be quite nice. I think that having something like a familiar that can do that scouting for us, kind of like we mentioned with the Druid, but now you don't have to risk your life, you just send the familiar instead. I think that that's actually pretty good. And then, maybe absorb elements or some other kind of spell like that if we just have some low level spells are very, very strong options and give us some nice defensive choices on the monk that we wouldn't normally have, especially shield. Now, like I said, Find Familiar, great spell as well. So overall, I'm giving Fighter an A, but we'll just put that Eldritch Knight maybe like half a tier above. It's like an A plus compared to just an A, you know what I mean? So next we have the Paladin. Even though Iron Fist from the comic books is really cool, it turns out that building a good monk paladin is actually pretty tough unless you really want to invest heavily in the paladin, which isn't necessarily a bad choice. The problem is that while at first glance being able to smite a lot of times in a round is awesome, the problem is we do not have a lot of spell slots because we're only a half caster. Monk's not contributing to our spell casting at all, and so we are very, very limited in that regard. We obviously can't benefit from things like weapon or from the shield and armor choices. Our fighting styles as a paladin are quite limited compared to fighter, where we got like every one to choose from, right? Like I said, the spells are somewhat limited. However, I will mention that, and we're needing charisma now suddenly as well, so that could be a bit of a problem. But I do think that the idea of maybe just grabbing a couple levels of paladin just for smites, and then maybe adding like the cleric or druid or something like that alongside it to get some more casting levels could be a decent investment. If, now you're looking at like 3 classes potentially, but maybe you just wanted some more low-level spells, and you're just going to be like, hey, I'm just going to smite with some of these, and maybe I'll cast a Divine Favor or a Shield of Faith or whatever else, right? I do feel like that's more of a mid to higher level multi-class, like 11, 10 plus kind of range, right? Because now we're needing some monk, we're needing some paladin, and we're needing at least enough of whatever the casting class is to justify, getting some more spell levels, right? But I do think that could happen. But if we're just looking at the combination of the two, I'm afraid that Paladin with Monk just on its own, unless we're willing to go really high in Paladin and sacrifice like getting extra attack twice and it doesn't stack, having our Aura of Protection, which probably won't be great if we have a bunch of Dex and Wisdom, and then we need Charisma and probably some Con. I think that gets a little rough. So I gave it a D, which might not be fair. It might be a C, but I've actually seen somebody try to play it, and I mean, to be fair, I don't think they did a great job of optimizing it, so there is that, but there were some real problems with it, and I don't know, maybe it just didn't impress me, so maybe it's my own biases that I'm bringing into this, because let's face it, these are just my opinions, right? I can be right, I can be wrong, it's just all my ideas here, but I didn't think it was great. So, make of that what you will. Next, though, is Ranger. And I'm quite happy to say that Ranger and Monk are actually a very, very strong multiclass. Ranger is going to give us a fighting style as well. Again, somewhat limited, just call it the Paladin. But I think that it gives us some better options than the Paladin does. Gives us some spells, subclass feature. Well, I think most of the Ranger subclasses are decent options. Just as a general note here for this specific multiclass, I'd probably avoid the Horizon Walker and the Monster Slayer. Not because they're bad subclasses, but because they use bonus action abilities, and our bonus action is already very, very busy. And we have other classes like, like the Hunter or the Gloomstalker or whatever else that's not going to be constantly calling for that bonus action, and it's just going to be like a smoother fit, right? So again, it's not that Horizon Walker and Monster Slayer are bad, it's just that they don't synergize with Monk as well as some of the others. I like the idea of Kensai 5+ and Ranger 4. I think that's pretty decent. We've already talked about Hunter's Mark, so we don't need to talk about it a lot more here. I do kind of like the idea of getting past without trace, but that's not till 5, and then we're wasting the extra attack feature. So I probably wouldn't bother going that far. But Ranger 3 or 4, if we wanted the extra ability score increase, is not too bad. Especially, like I said, if we're going with something like a Gloomstalker or a Hunter where we're getting that extra attack potentially or extra damage, I think that's probably pretty decent. And the Gloomstalker, let's not forget, also gets a bonus to their initiative, and that's not bad either. You've also got the ability to possibly hide against creatures that require dark sight. That can be somewhat nice as well. You can kind of play that more like ninja type of character a little bit. And overall, I think it's pretty good. I'm giving Ranger an A. I think that it's actually very, very strong. Next, we have the Rogue. Rogue, especially if we start Rogue, we could have more skills. Then we're delaying things like extra attack and stunning strike, which, you know, I don't know if I'm thrilled about that, but, you know, let's throw it out there as a possibility. You could go either way, start Rogue or start Monk. So skills, expertise, cunning action. I know cunning action probably sounds like it's probably going to be wasted for the most part because we've already talked about how busy your bonus action is. But cunning action does have one really nice advantage on a monk because it allows us to do things like disengage or get extra movement from our cunning action with like a dash and stuff like that. And this can save us a lot of key points where normally on the monk to get those type of abilities, we're going to be required to spend our key. And because we're dipping Rogue, we don't have quite as much key as we would normally have. So this can be a nice way to like, hey, I can use my cunning action for that instead of my key points. And then, you know, now that I'm in the fight, the next round, I can just use my key points on flurry of blows and stuff, right? Obviously, sneak attack damage, of course, never a bad thing either. Again, much like the Eldritch Knight, I like Arcane Trickster for shield, absorb elements, find familiar, stuff like that. Assassin, though, can be pretty cool, especially if you actually trigger your assassinate ability, or your whatever the level 3 ability is, where you get auto crits on all your attacks. You know, auto critting on a bunch of attacks around is pretty fun. So that's good. I like Assassin. Swashbuckler can be decent, especially if you're pretty fast. You may not have an ally within 5 feet. You may not want to always have to hold your action or something. I also like the idea of, we've already mentioned Iron Fist from Marvel Comics, but what about if you want to play Psylocke? And if you're Psychic Blade, Soul Knife could be just the thing you're looking for there. Now, I'm actually not going to go into a ton of detail about this because I'm actually planning on making a monk, like a Psylocke basically video, like how to play Psylocke in D&D. There are a few issues though, which is that once you use your Soul Knife, you kind of need to have another one ready if you have more than one attack around, because it disappears after your first one. So that can be a little tricky. But still, I think it's very thematically cool. But anyways, even leaving Psylocke aside, Shadow Monk plus Rogue, pretty good ninja as well. The ability to like teleport through darkness is kind of handy as well. So I think that there's some cool stuff there. Overall, I'm giving Rogue an A. The fact that they're both using Dex, I think, really makes it a strong combination. Adding sneak attack damage, even if it's only like 2 or 3 dice 6, on top of all the damage that the monk could potentially be doing, is just added bonus, to be honest. It's very strong. I like it a lot. So, moving on to Sorcerer. Again, Sorcerer is going to give us spells. That's probably about all it's going to offer. So honestly, I mean, maybe if we go with man, why am I blanking on everything? The freaking dragons. You could get scales and an extra hit point per sorcerer level. I mean, I guess that's not nothing, right? So it could help with some defense there, which can be all right. One problem though is that usually if I'm like a martial class and I'm dipping sorcerer or going a bunch of sorcerer, it's because I probably want things like quickening spell casting, right? So I can cast spells as a bonus action and still use my actual action for the attack action, right? But we've already talked about how incredibly busy the monk's bonus action section usually is, and that can be a bit of an issue. So there is that. Also, things like Green Flame Blade and Booming Blade don't really work with extra attack. So, you know, they don't work with our offhand attacks or our flurry of blows either for the most part. So, I mean, there's not really a lot there. That said, though, the idea of a Shadow Monk and a Shadow Sorcerer combination is very appealing to me and very thematic, obviously. And I think it can be quite fun as well. Like if you went Shadow Monk 6, Shadow Sorcerer 4, sorry, then you could like create Magical Darkness, which you can see in. You can also teleport around in it, like we already mentioned earlier. Problem is, though, that now you need key points, which are based on your monk levels, and sorcery points, which are based on your sorcery levels, and you never really have enough of either one. So there are some problems there. I wanted to rate it higher, but realistically, I think it's a D. The idea of the Shadow Monk, Shadow Sorcerer, though, is just so cool to me that I really wanted to rate it higher, but just honestly, I just can't justify it. It's not that good. Next we have the Warlock. Warlock suffers a lot of the same problems as Sorcerer, but I think that it actually fares slightly better. Partly because things like Armor of Shadows invocation can be pretty nice on a monk. Armor of Agathis, potentially, if you have, say, second or third level spells, potentially, right? That can be nice. Obviously, the Shadow Monk plus Devil Sight, pretty good combo there. You get Hex. You could potentially be taking something like a Hexblade's Curse as well, which is scaling with your proficiency bonus, not your Warlock levels, so that's pretty good. Overall, I felt like it had a lot of the same draws as Sorcerer, but without any of the downsides, potentially, right? So I don't think Warlock is great, let's be clear on that, but I think it still is probably a C. So I'm giving it a C grade. Like I said, it's not great, but it's not bad by any means either. And I think it can be kind of fun. And if you got a party that doesn't mind Darkness Devil Sight and doesn't get mad at you for like ruining their line of sight that they wanted to cast spells, that could be an issue. But overall, I think it's decent. So finally, that brings us to the Wizard. And unfortunately, the Wizard is much like the Sorcerer, but probably even worse. They have a lot of the same problems that we talked about with your Artificer. There we go. Jeez, not my night. You can tell I'm tired. Anyways, a lot of the same problems with the Artificer. You don't have like the the armor issues, but there is some problems. That said, as always, War Wizard does surprisingly well. Grabbing Shield is still not bad. Find Familiar is still good. Getting some ritual spell casting. Overall, though, I feel like it's just... I think War Wizard's probably like a C or a D maybe. But Wizard overall is probably another E. Again, we're needing too many different stats, and I don't know that we're really getting enough out of it. Maybe, especially because like if we wanted Absorb Elements, Shield, and Find Familiar, we can already get those from Eldritch Knight and Arcane Trickster. And I feel like just both of those are just better, right? So it's not that those abilities are bad. Like those abilities alone could move Wizard up if we wanted to rate it that way. But it isn't just about how good the combination is. It's also how good it is compared to the alternatives, right? And I just feel like the alternatives are quite a bit stronger. So unfortunately, Wizard, you're getting an E, except for War Wizard, who I guess won't give you a C or a D, probably a D. So final grades. In the S tier, we have nothing, sadly. However, in the A tier, we have quite a bit. We have the Ranger, the Rogue, the War Cleric, and at the bottom of the A tier, but still there, we got the Fighter. In the B tier, we have the Cleric and the Druid. In the C tier, we have the Warlock and the Barbarian. And in the D tier, Paladin, Bard, Sorcerer, and I guess we'll throw in War Wizard. And E, we have Wizard and Artificer. Sorry, Artificer. You were dead last today. Anyways, that is it for the Monk. I don't think it's too surprising. Monk did quite well in some categories and very badly in others. But like I said, I think that overall, if we're going, fairly heavy on the Monk levels, there are some decent combinations out there. And there are some nice ways to like boost our damage or, find other ways to like the cunning action to save ourselves on some key points and stuff. There are some nice combinations out there. So I don't think it's as bad as a lot of people make it out to be. Anyways, that is it for Monk. We'll probably, as I've been doing lately, I'll probably make a couple Monk videos coming out here. We'll have our Psylocke build, but we'll also have, a few just Monk only ones where we'll look at some of the subclasses that we haven't covered so far, which to be fair is a lot because I haven't made a lot of Monk videos. Sorry, Monk fans. But this is where we're making up for it, right? Anyways, and then after a couple Monk videos, 2-3 Monk videos, we'll be back to this series and we'll be continuing on with our videos going next to Paladin. And Paladin is one that I'm quite looking forward to because personally, I think Paladin has some excellent choices for multiclassing. They've got some really bad options too, of course, but they've got a couple S tiers, so that should be good. Anyways, that's everything. Thank you for watching. Feel free to like, subscribe, ring the bell for notifications, and most importantly, leave me your comments in the comment section. I love reading everybody's comments, and I will see you next time. Bye.